Hotels in World Cup host cities raised their prices by as much as 400% this summer, expecting the biggest payday of their lives. Weeks before the tournament even ended, bookings in some of the biggest host cities were tracking below a normal year, a year with no World Cup at all. And the real reason isn't just that hotels got greedy, it's a decision FIFA made about how it would run this tournament. A decision almost nobody outside the sports business world noticed that quietly determined who was guaranteed to win here and who was set up to lose, no matter what they charged. We'll get to it, but first, you need to understand why hotels ever thought this bet made sense in the first place. This isn't a simple story about greedy hotel owners gouging desperate tourists. Every host city hotel operator was making an individually reasonable bet based on real historical precedent and real projections handed to them by people who should have known better. What makes this worth unpacking isn't that someone was evil, it's what happens when dozens of individually reasonable bets add up to a collectively bad outcome, and why that outcome was baked into the structure of this World Cup before a single room was ever booked. World Cups have traditionally been run by local organizing committees, national federations that absorb the costs of hosting and also share directly in the revenue the tournament generates. That shared risk, shared reward model is part of why the 1994 U.S. World Cup, still the highest attended in tournament history, is remembered as an economic success story for the cities that hosted it, even though economists later estimated its real impact fell somewhere between $5.5 and $9.3 billion short of the rosy pre-tournament projections. For 2026, FIFA changed that. For the first time in the tournament's history, FIFA is running the World Cup directly itself, rather than through national organizing committees. That means FIFA now controls essentially all of the revenue, broadcast and media rights, global sponsorship deals, ticketing, hospitality packages, merchandise. Host cities and their hotels aren't structural partners sharing in FIFA's windfall anymore. They're outside the tent, footing their own stadium and infrastructure bills, left to independently capture whatever piece of the visitor spending they can grab on their own. None of that would have mattered much if the projections floating around beforehand hadn't been so enormous. Hotels weren't pricing off a hunch, they were pricing off numbers coming from FIFA itself, from host committees and from local tourism boards, all pointing the same direction. This was going to be the biggest windfall these cities had ever seen. Before a ball was kicked, FIFA and the World Trade Organization projected the tournament would generate $80.1 billion in global economic impact, with $30.5 billion of that landing in the U.S. alone. Host cities built their own budgets around similarly bold numbers. New York and New Jersey's host committee projected $3.3 billion in regional impact and more than 26,000 jobs, a projection FIFA and city officials were confident enough in to unveil by ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. So hotels priced accordingly. 13 of the 16 host cities saw hotel rates jump at least 80% year over year. In Guadalajara, rooms that averaged $90 a night before the tournament were listed at $511 during it, more than a 460% increase. Some Vancouver listings approached $900 a night for rooms that would normally run a few hundred. Boston topped the list of U.S. host cities at an average of $611 a night, while Houston, at the low end, still averaged $205, itself a significant jump over its typical summer rate. But as of mid-March, advance hotel bookings for New York's World Cup weeks were tracking 2% below bookings for the exact same dates in 2025, a year with no special event at all. This wasn't a one-city problem. The American Hotel and Lodging Association surveyed hotels across 11 U.S. host cities and found nearly 80% were booking below their internal forecasts. Some operators described the tournament bluntly as a non-event. Rooms they'd blocked off months in advance, expecting a bidding war, were quietly trickling back onto the open market as cancellations. By the time the final whistle blew, Bank of America put the tournament's total global economic impact at roughly $40 billion, about half of FIFA's original $80.1 billion projection. 11 U.S. host cities are now facing a combined shortfall that could reach $250 million. FIFA itself, meanwhile, is projected to net an estimated $8.9 billion from this World Cup, a number that didn't move because FIFA's revenue was never tied to how many hotel rooms actually sold in any individual city. If you've made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribing helps me keep making these. No pressure, but I'd appreciate it.
Here's the decision that made all of this close to inevitable. By cutting host cities and hotels out of a revenue-sharing structure, FIFA left every single hotel operator with exactly one way to capture value from the World Cup: charge whatever the market would bear as fast as possible, with nobody coordinating and nobody protecting the total pool of demand for the destination as a whole. There was no shared institution, no organizing committee with skin in the game the way there used to be, asking any individual hotel to hold prices steady for the good of the city's overall booking numbers. Every operator's rational move was to independently maximize their own rate as high and as early as they could lock it in. That's a textbook tragedy of the commons. Individually, every hotel's pricing decision made sense given what they'd been told to expect. Collectively, aggressive pricing across an entire city pushed visitors to book fewer nights, shift to secondary markets outside the city core, double up in shared rentals, or skip the trip to that particular host city altogether, which is close to exactly what happened, city after city, once the actual travel numbers came in below the hype. This isn't unique to soccer, and it isn't even the first time this exact pattern has played out around a mega event. Paris saw almost the identical story unfold ahead of the 2024 Olympics. A year out, hotel rates in the city had roughly tripled, with some three-star rooms quoted near $700 a night for the opening ceremony. Owners flooded Airbnb with listings, certain they'd struck gold, but as the actual games approached, demand simply didn't show up at those prices. The city's own tourism office ended up predicting nearly a third of hotel rooms would sit empty, and by the time the opening ceremony arrived, average nightly rates had fallen as much as 41% to 57% from their peak. Sound familiar? Whenever the party that captures the guaranteed upside of an event is structurally separated from the parties bearing the risk and the costs, the exposed parties will rationally act to protect themselves in the short term, even when it undermines the total outcome everyone hoped for. It's the same logic behind landlords hiking rents ahead of a new subway stop that hasn't opened yet, or short-term rental hosts flooding a market right before a festival, hoping to cash in once and worrying about occupancy later. When the guaranteed winner and the exposed risk-bearers aren't the same party, you shouldn't expect the exposed party to optimize for the shared long-term picture. You should expect them to grab what they can while they can, and you should expect that behavior multiplied across an entire city to eventually undercut itself. FIFA is already banking on an estimated $14 billion in revenue for its 2027 to 2030 cycle, and nothing about the underlying structure is set to change for future tournaments. The direct control model that shaped 2026 appears to be the new normal, not a one-time experiment. Some host cities are still publicly defending their original projections. A spokesperson for one host city's mayoral office has argued that official shortfall estimates don't capture the tournament's full long-term value, including future tourism and global exposure that's harder to price in a single quarter. Whether that holds up will depend on data that's still being counted, and on whether hotels in the next host cities remember any of this the next time a mega event rolls into town. So the real lesson isn't hotel owners got greedy during the World Cup, it's that when one party is structurally guaranteed to win no matter what happens on the ground, and everyone else is left to fend for themselves based on someone else's projections, you can't really call the outcome a surprise. Every host city bet its hotels would capture a piece of FIFA's windfall. Almost none of them were ever actually positioned to. Paris made the same bet 2 years earlier and lost it the same way. The pattern isn't hidden, it's just easy to ignore right up until you're the one holding the empty rooms. If you want to see which industry gets tested next, subscribe. Corporate Truth breaks down one of these every week.